21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
I'm out to try to get people to question what generic business advice is not really meant for them. I think a lot of business advice is it's a size 12 shoe, and I don't know what that translates to in the European world, but in the U.S. market, size 12 for men is the most common. And so if you have a size 12 foot, it works great. And, if you got a size 11 or 13, you can make it work. But if you got a size 9 or 14 foot, it's not going to work for you. The people purveying it aren't going to tell you that. It's going to claim it's going to solve all your problems. Read this book, take this course, everything will be better. And that's going to be true for some, but most businesses aren't your average business. And they're not your average business because they're not run by an average person. They're run by an individual. They're unique, their market's unique, the people they're having to lead is unique. There's just all these different facets that make their business unique. And so the best business advice is one that is built on principles that are true for all business. And then the leader is the one that needs to sort of build their best decisions up from there. That's kind of my MO. That's a lot of what the book is about. And that's really what I learned in 12 years of leading a business. Is some things work for you and some things don't. But if you can figure that out up front, you save yourself a lot of time. I'm Zack Tomlin. I spent 12 years founding, growing, and then later exiting my own business. I've been a part of the leadership team of 100+ person organizations, and I'm now a business coach and consultant that deals primarily with businesses between 10 and 200 employees across a variety of industries. And so I've seen business from just about every angle you can. I'm also the author of Craft, the Expedition of Business. I think most leaders start in business where we all start, and that's with mimicry. And I write about this in the book. It's called The Mountain of Why, and it's got 5 levels to it. And level 1 is where we all start with anything. We mimic what we see other people doing, what seems to be working well for them. It's kind of a safe place to start, and for a lot of things it works fine. But to really make the decisions that are going to be best for you and your organization, we've got to climb a little higher. And some people get using heuristics, kind of what's worked for them in the past, and if they get more sophisticated, they make it to level 3, which is more the idea of frameworks. How can we consider multiple variables at once? But really where we want to try to get to as leaders is the top of that mountain, and that's based on first principles. And first principles can either be things that are absolutely true about the world that nobody's disputing, but most of the time in business, they're more of a matter of a strong opinion. What you believe about employees, what you believe about competition, what you believe about the right thing to do, what you believe about the best value you can bring for your customers. Those things you might not be able to prove empirically, but in business, we've got to treat those as true because that's the foundation we're going to build a lot of decisions from. So I wouldn't say leaders necessarily start off in the wrong place. They're just advancing their craft and trying to figure out the principles that work for them. When you read leadership advice, when you read business advice, that's written for a generic business leader. It's written for a generic business. But I assure you, if they've started a company, if they're leading a company, they're not generic. And so they're going to have certain strengths and weaknesses, and the decisions and strategies they ultimately implement, they have to work with those strengths, but also we have to be ready to buttress those weaknesses. I think clarity gets lost because you're introducing more voices, and so the chain of communication becomes longer. When I started a business, our first office had 3 or 4 people in it, and so you could sit in the same room and everybody knew what they were doing. And then suddenly you've got 10 or 12 people and you're in multiple rooms, and the chain of communication gets that much more difficult. And then one day you've got 100 people and they're spread across 3 offices, well, then it's very difficult to get everybody on the same page. And so what you had more of a buffer for before in terms of being clear on objectives, strategies, stories, values, whatever the business buzzword is you want to use, then that gets amplified when the organization gets larger. There's 2 ways to go about that in business. One is you treat this as a big machine and everybody's parts and gears and you're trying to get it all aligned. But unfortunately, that machine erodes and rusts and breaks down over time, and you're constantly trying to maintain and to keep it running. The other option is you treat that business more of kind of an ecosystem or the right environment. And then you're trying to frame the conditions about, instead of trying to get people to do X or believe Y, what are the conditions we can create that allow somebody to be more likely to do X or believe Y? Because then it scales the same way as a forest does or any other ecosystem, because you've crafted the environment that now, whether it's 5 people growing in that environment or whether it's 500, they're all being pushed on the same influences, and you're not fighting that problem of scale you do in a more mechanical fashion. So my primary thing is, and this again comes from spending a lot of time running a business and dealing with other business leaders, is business has to be holistic. It's about the whole program, the whole system, the whole environment. And so you can chop that up in a lot of different ways. The way I choose to divide that, to stick with the expedition theme, is business is a lot like expeditions, and you have 4 parts of that. You have 1, you have the destination. 2, you have the crew, the people you're going with. 3, you have the leader that's trying to make everything happen. And then 4, you have the expedition itself, which is a lot more about the systems and structures and cadence that lets an organization run and head in the right direction, even when its leader can't be there to direct every step. I cover that in the book. That's the framework that's outlined in the book, but that's also reflective of my coaching and consulting practice. Is if you come in and just try to implement systems and best practices and talk in KPIs and what have you, that's helpful. But a lot of times those fall short because there's nobody there with the right leadership capacity to maintain it all. And even once you have the leaders, it's, well, who are we bringing into the organization? Everybody likes to use the phrase, right people, right seats. Nobody's disputing that. But how do we figure out who are the right people? Who are the right members of our crew? How do we go about that? And so we've got to have a process there. And again, to go back to the mountain of why analogy, what are the first principles people believe about who is going to fit in their organization, and how to use those to select them? While at the same time, marrying that with, we got to be pragmatic, that we can't wait on these unicorns, somebody that's a perfect fit. We kind of have to work with what's available in the market. And so that goes a little bit back to the expedition piece and the designs and systems and structures that help everybody do a good job, even if they're maybe not a quote A player or quote rock star, because we can't have an organization that's built entirely out of those. And then the destination piece, it's certainly about the story of the organization. It's about the goal. It's about where we want to head. But in an even deeper sense, a lot of organizations struggle to separate their intentions and their actions and the decisions from the results, because we can't control the results. There's just too many variables and too many factors in business, but we can control how thoughtful our decisions are and how well we go about executing those. And then the big piece that's also mixed in here on the destination thing is, what do we believe as an organization? You go into a lot of companies and they're happy to tell you their core values or the words they have posted on the wall, but what does that really tell us about what I call their pool of beliefs in the book? How should we treat customers? How do we view employees? What time frame are we thinking about this business? And I find a lot of, quote, misalignment in business comes from the fact that nobody's asking these questions. They're very meta level things that seem to just be not even assumed, they're just ignored. And so business, much like expedition, we're not going to reach the destination we seek if we don't understand why we're going there in the first place. I would say in my journey just through the business world, from starting a business individually to seeing the inner workings and being part of a leadership team of a company that was hundreds of employees, it's that kind of range between 10 and let's say 100, maybe up to 200 employees where things really get messy, and that's well trodden ground in the business world. There's a reason that happens. You have somebody that's typically the leader, the inspiration, if you want to use the term visionary, that's there. And so we're trying to make this transition between somebody's craft moves from doing the work well to helping other people do the work well. And that's a big transition. I think it's the most difficult transition people go through in that time period is how do they become an executive? How do they develop an executive mindset to where they're no longer the ones doing the work, but they're helping other people do the work better? And it takes a lot of work, and sometimes it takes a resource from the outside to get in and figure out how do we institutionalize that knowledge, that vision, those beliefs, and make that part of the designed environment that the rest of the team is operating within, and just to make sure they're all on the same page of what's the story. I give the analogy or tell the story in the book about my business to where if you sit at a desk all day with a specific task in front of you, you have one set of challenges. In my case, that was the clients we were trying to get information from to finish our designs. Well, from the owner's standpoint, the leader's standpoint, we don't want our clients seen as the challenge. And so it took telling the story correctly and communicating with people to paint the bigger picture of where every individual fit within the organization and where that individual or that organization fit within the broader ecosystem that our client was dealing with. And at that point, we could get aligned on what is the real challenge we're helping our client solve. And that was not only clarifying, but it was just more engaging because now people understood the story they wanted to be a part of. Every business faces what I call the 4 horsemen of the business apocalypse, and that's competition, human nature, limited resources, and entropy, or the tendency of the universe to unfortunately dissolve into disorder. And both competition and limited resources really create constraints. I mean, as do human nature. People can only work for so long, they can only remember so much. Competition's always going to be there to beat us down on price, to cut corners that we wouldn't. And then ultimately what's more germane for business leaders is the limited resources of they too only have so much time in the day. There's only so much money in the bank account. So what can they really spend? And business leaders often are understandably frustrated by that aspect, but I try to take a more positive view where those constraints help you make better decisions, because limiting of that options to some degree gives you a more manageable set of choices. If we had unlimited money, unlimited time, well, there's also an unlimited amount of ways and directions we can go. But when we get real about the constraints we're up against, now we're making better decisions because it's not fantasy anymore. It's here's the real world. Here's the things we're fighting against. Will our plan withstand those headwinds? I'm a big believer that one's quality of life is directly correlated to how well their work situation goes. Most adults spend the majority of their time at work, and it's hard to have a good life if you're working for a bad boss, if you're part of a bad organization. It's just wasted potential. I mean, it's wasted potential of the individual, but then also wasted potential of the life they could be having. And I think most leaders see that and they understand the weight of that, but unfortunately they're feeling that same weight because their life, their family's experience also ties back to well, how are things going at work? And I saw the transition of what getting a handle on this can mean. Because when I started my business, there were stretches where I was pulling all-nighters, I was working on vacation. I definitely owned a job. I didn't own a business. It was running me ragged, and I suffered from that, and as did my family. But my aim here is to help people understand how to master the craft of business, to cut through the noise, understand the principles that have always been true about business, to help understand themselves better, that we really need to leverage their strengths, but at the same time be aware of our weaknesses, because that's what's going to cause failure. And we do that, things can improve. I mean, I saw it firsthand. My business grew faster, and sure, the financial metrics of that were great, but the big thing was I could go on vacation, I had more time, I was working the amount of time I wanted to, and just everybody was happier at the end of the day. And it wasn't magic, and it's a big reason I wrote the book, is to try to articulate what all happened during that process. And it helped clarify it to me that when you start discovering these principles and you have these systems about decision making that interlock, you can really build an organization that is what you intended it to be, not only financially, but in terms of time and the opportunity it provides for your staff. And I think the last is just the biggest one, is that's how we as business leaders can really make a better world, is if we make better organizations for people who come to work. We improve the life of that individual, their families, their neighbors, you name it. It just keeps going down the line. Best way to connect with me is, please reach out on LinkedIn. I'd be glad to talk to whoever. But then also, if you want to check out the book, you can visit the expeditionofbusiness.com. Lots of good information on there. And if you go to the expeditionofbusiness.com/journal, that'll take you to a free download for a companion journal that goes along with the book. Because when I wrote the book, I wanted to write a good book, but I also wanted to build an asset that people could take their time to go through and develop their own thoughts, so they don't read it and move on, but they really have an experience in reading it. And so those are two great ways to connect with me.
21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.